In this program, I'm going to demonstrate input files, and input files can be a little bit tricky for beginning programmers because the input file for your program um, by default needs to be in the same location as your project. And if it's not going to work. So this is the name of my project over here, demo. So I have to make sure that my input file is stored in the same folder as this project file. So before I start to talk too much about input files, let's just go over this sample program. I just have a string variable called name. I've got a counter set to 1. It's going to continue while it's less than or equal to 3. And it's just a simple while loop. It'll ask me to enter a name, then count will be 2, ask another name. So it's just a while loop that goes through 3 times. It'll ask for 3 names. And I suppose I should not only input them, but also output them so we can see what we're getting here. Okay, let me just make this a little bit better. All right, so I'm using an input operator. A name is a string, so I'm not going to be able to, in this example, enter any names that have spaces in them, so I'll just be using first names. Okay, so let's see what this looks like. All right, so I read the name, it displays it back out. All right, so all of this is fine, but a lot of times we don't just have someone, sitting there entering data into every program. A lot of times the data might be stored in a file, and we read that data from a file instead of from the user like we're doing here. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an input file. It's going to have 3 names in it, and then we'll pull that information in from the input file. So before I start to put any code in here from the input file, I want to talk about creating the file itself. There's a lot of ways you can do it. You can do it in Notepad if you want. There's a couple different ways to do it in C++, but I'm going to show you the way in C++ that will ensure that your file gets put in the same location as your project. So we're going to come over here to resource files, and I'm going to right click on this, and I'm going to choose add new item, and I'm going to choose utility and then text file. Okay, and I'm going to call this names.txt. And you don't have to put the .txt extension if you don't want, because it'll put it on for you. If you put it on, it still works. So I'll just type name here and I'll hit add. Okay, so what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to put my 3 names, Bill, Bob, and Sue, and then I'm going to save this. Okay. I'm going to pause this video for a second, and I'm going to show you my file structure so you can see where my file is. Okay, so here you can see the file I just created, name. It's a text document. You can see it's located in my folder, my demo folder where my project is. This is what you have to look for. This VC++ project, the input file has to be in the same folder as this. So if you create it in Notepad or you put it in the wrong spot, you can go, into, Windows, and you can move it to where it needs to be, or you can create it the way I showed you. Okay, so now I'm going to, let me just close some things here, go back to my file. And we have a file that exists now. I'm going to pull that data from a file. I'm going to show you how to do it. So I'm going to include fstream. Okay, that's the library that's needed for files. And then I'm going to declare an ifstream. That's short for input file stream. I'll just call it input file. And now I need to open the input file. So I need to do an association between this file and the file that's on my disk. So my input file is called name.txt. So input files, the input file stream variable, I'm going to open this file. So from this point on in my program, if I use the variable in file, I'm referring to this file. So we don't have to prompt the user anymore, right? We're just going to pull the information from the file. And instead of bringing it from the keyboard, I'm going to bring it from my input file. So it'll read it from the file, it'll display it, and then when I'm done, just like with output files, we want to close the file because it's good programming practice. And there we can see the names are coming from the file. All right. So this is good, but I'm somewhat limited because if I go into this file and I put more names, right? And I save it, how many names do I have there? 7, right? And I run my program, I still only get 3, and that's because my while loop only goes through 3 times. Okay. But when you have input files, at the very end of your input file, you'll have what's called an end of file marker. You don't see it, but it's there. And when you're using this, you got to be sure not to have like blank lines or blank spaces. At the very end of your data, that's where you should save your file, and then your end of file marker will be right here. One of the nice things about a while loop is we can check for when we reach the end of file. So I'm not going to need a counter anymore because I'm just going to read all of them. And this is what the syntax looks like in here. While not, that's a not operator, input file.eof. I'll explain what that does in a minute. EOF is a function that checks for the end of file marker. Here's the file name. So if I find the end of file marker, this is going to return true. But in this case, so like let's say I'm going in, it sees the first name, end of file is false, the while loop will end. So I need to put a not operator in front of it to change my true to false. So while I'm not at the end of file, it's going to read a name and display it. Now this code, when I run it, is going to work for all the names. Okay, and that's a much better way of working with input files, is just keep reading until you reach the end of file marker. The one other thing we want to be careful of when we're working with input files is that if we don't have the right file name or the file's not in the right location, so let me just change this file name to this. Okay, I don't have a file name that. And I'm going to run my program and let's see what happens. All right, that's not good. I have an infinite loop here. So if I don't find the file, I shouldn't continue on with the rest of the program. So I really need some type of check every time you open a file to make sure that it finds that file. If it does, then continue on with the program. If it doesn't, you should give the user an error message and just get out of the program. There's no need to go on any further. So I'm going to add an if statement here to help me check for that. So I'm going to say if input file. Now what that does, and it looks a little weird, but there's actually a flag in this input file object. So, oops, I'm sorry, I got that in the wrong spot. As soon as I open my file, I can say if input file, okay? Now, what this does is, this will be true if it opened this file fine. But, so if it's true, I want to continue on with the rest of my program. I don't want to have to put my whole program inside of curly braces, so I'm going to say if not input file. That means it's false. So what if there's a problem? What I want to do is I want to see out input file not found. And you're going to need a system pause here, just like you need one at the end of your program, because if you don't have it, you won't see the error message display. And then I'm going to use an exit function. Exit -1. Exit just exits your program. It doesn't go any further. And that's what you should do if it can't find the file. A -1 returns a -1 to the operating system, telling it there's some type of problem. So if it can't find the file, this will execute, your program will end. If it can find the file, right, it'll just continue on with the rest of the program. That's just a simple if statement. If this is false, it just goes down and continues. So let's see what happens here. All right, so it all works well. And now let's go in and change this to an invalid file name again, and let's see what happens. All right, great. Okay, so with input files, very important that your input file is located in the same place as your project. That's number one. Number two, always check for a valid file, for your file being found. If it can't find your file, it's not going to tell you without this code in there. It's just going to do something strange. And when it does something strange, you might take a program that runs perfectly fine and start changing it around because you think there's a problem with it, when really the only problem was it couldn't find the file.